Utah.
Mr. President, I stand to support my friend, Senator Rand Paul, and to encourage my colleagues in the United States Senate to support his proposed amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. In the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers lodged the following complaint against the administration of King George III. Quote, "He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to civil power," close quote. A decade later, the founders included a safeguard in the Constitution so that civil power, in other words, the people and their duly elected representatives, would play an important role in matters of war and peace. This safeguard takes up all of 7 words in the Constitution. The Congress shall have power to declare war. Today, this safeguard, this crucial check on government, has been eroded in subtle ways and in ways that many Americans would find downright alarming. Congressional authorization for the use of military force is being used to, in a contorted way to justify wars with an ever-growing list of adversaries without any input from Congress or from the American people about whether we should be fighting those wars in the first place. Senator Paul has introduced an amendment to sunset 2 such authorizations: the 2001 authorization for the use of military force against the perpetrators of 9/11, and the 2002 authorization for the use of military force against the regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. I support my colleague's amendment because the world has changed and our adversaries have changed since those authorizations were passed into law by Congress. Osama bin Laden is dead. Saddam Hussein is dead. In fact, his statue in Firdos Square came down almost a decade and a half ago. Yet thousands of American troops are still serving in the Middle East based on the same authorizations Congress granted more than a decade and a half ago. Instead of changing these authorizations to reflect a changing world, politicians have used the old authorizations to start new wars. Wars in countries other than Iraq and Afghanistan, against adversaries that had nothing to do with 9/11. The 2001 AUMF has been used to justify a drone war across the Middle East without a debate or a vote in Congress. It's been used to justify air wars in Libya and Yemen without a debate or a vote in Congress. And it's been used to justify military action against the Islamic State terrorist group without a debate or a vote in Congress. Some of these military actions may be justified, but the best way to determine whether they are is to submit them to scrutiny, to debate and vote on the matter in Congress as the Constitution prescribes. As many of you know, we're in the midst of a sort of populist challenge to Washington, D.C. Senator Paul and I have listened to countless Americans voice many of their grievances against Washington. The gist of their complaint in this area is this: they don't feel like their interests are being taken into account in our nation's capital. Bit by bit, they've watched their representatives cede decision-making power to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in the executive branch. They've watched as a Washington consensus has emerged, a kind of faux consensus shared nowhere else other than in Washington, D.C. If you understand these concerns, that Washington, D.C. is deeply unrepresentative of how much of the country feels, then you understand a lot about the populist moment. And that applies to foreign policy as well as domestic policy, to how our government conducts itself abroad as well as at home. A decade and a half after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, the American people want a place at the table in decisions about war and peace, about life and death. They want to be represented in decisions that concern them and their sons and their daughters so intimately. If we do not give the American people these things, if we don't listen to their concerns, advocate for them in the legislative branch, and vote on them openly under the light of day in this chamber, then we are failing them as representatives, and we're ignoring the Constitution. That is why I'm supporting Senator Paul's amendment, I hope my colleagues will join me so that this issue can get the vote it deserves. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.